within the week. All righty. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the March edition of the Rita B. Leahy Career Series. This series has been funded by a very generous alumna who was just recognized by our Alumni Association this year as being an extraordinary alum. And she really feels passionately that doctoral students need to be exposed and have opportunities to learn about the wide variety of careers that are outside of the academy. So back in the old days, we did this in person, but since COVID, we've been doing this online, which has really afforded us some fantastic alumni and other panelists because you can attend from anywhere. So for those of you who've met me, I'm Susan Martin, the Program Director for Doctoral Career Development. I'm a Career Center employee embedded in the graduate school. I have two fantastic graduate students that work with me. April Fuller does weekly foundational career workshops just for PhDs. And Sydney is a doctoral career consultant. You'll find her inside of our Elms Canvas space, which we call Doctoral Career Navigator. And at the end of the session, I'll say a little bit more about those. But I really want to get to the meat of today's program. So we have three fantastic panelists, and this is informal, so I'm going to call them by their first names, Becca, Stan, and Sylvia. And we'll go in that order today. Today's panel is really focused on leveraging those transferable skills that doctoral students get through their training, but so often do not acknowledge that they have. And each one of them is pursuing a career path that perhaps they hadn't considered in the beginning. And I'm going to let you I'm going to let them tell you their stories, and then we'll do some Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to ask Becca if she will go ahead and introduce herself and start sharing her story.
All right, well, thanks, Susan. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Becca Xu. It's really great to be part of this event. I was telling Susan that I used to actually attend a few when I was a grad student at Maryland as well, and I remember it was very useful. So, yeah, it's great to be back, to be able to share some of my experience and also just insights, I guess, in general with some of our current students. So currently, I'm a UX researcher at Amazon. I conduct user research and insights for some of Amazon's enterprise products. And as probably most of you know, Amazon has a lot of products. So there are a lot of UX research teams around, mostly kind of serving the different digital products. And you can think of Amazon Prime, Alexa, or Kindle, or anything that you might be familiar with associated with Amazon. So and before joining Amazon, I was also a UX researcher at a consulting firm, which is also a government contractor in the DC area. One of the many government contractors in this area, I should say. So that was kind of my first role after finishing at Maryland. I was in journalism at the Philip Merrill College of Journalism. I defended my dissertation back in 2018. So I started working right before my defense, and that was a pretty tense time, as some of you can imagine, working on your dissertation and trying to find a job, think about what you want to do next. But luckily, I think for me personally at the time, that aligned very well. It kind of like my job offer happened right before my defense, and everything was kind of, in motion at the time. So I think it was pretty lucky in that sense. But I think what really prepared me for UX research in particular was my research interest at the time was media audience research. So I did a lot of research on like audience engagement, and I touched on a lot of social psychology and a lot of audience behavior preference kind of theories. So those type of research experiences really helped me kind of, transition into analyzing user insights, user behaviors, user preferences. It's very much similar. And at Maryland, when I was in the PhD program, I was mainly kind of a mixed method researcher. So I used a lot of the both qualitative and quantitative research. But now as a UX researcher, I'm mostly qualitative. So the research experience I built throughout the my PhD program really still apply very much a lot. For example, like using interviews or conducting surveys, doing a lot of usability testing. And most of all, I would say kind of the communication part is really important. I would imagine a lot of you are teaching a lot of undergraduate classes. You're publishing a lot of research papers, going to conferences. Those experiences are very much kind of the very important soft skills, I would say, that transfer very well into industry as you work on teams, maybe manage some direct reports, even if you're in the management positions, or if you work with clients, that sort of communication skills really are really much transferable. So, so I think, for the most part, a PhD program really prepared me really well. But at the time, I also would say that probably networking played a huge part. I would imagine Stan and Sylvia would agree with me on that regard as well. It's I kind of reached out to a lot of folks in the industry at the time using LinkedIn just to have some informational interviews at the time. And those were really, really useful. And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to talk with you. Most people saw that. Well, sometimes I would imagine when you reach out to someone, you have kind of an idea in mind. This person seems like someone I can relate to, maybe have a similar background or just looks friendly or works at a company you're interested in. So those are kind of the criteria I used when I reached out to people on LinkedIn. And a lot of people responded very enthusiastically, very friendly. So I was able to kind of, get a little bit of insights on what it's like to work in that company, and also what it's like maybe for some of the PhD holders, especially to transition from academia to industry. So those are really helpful. I would say though, my first position after finishing at Maryland, ICF, the consulting firm, happened through networking. I happened to kind of have reached out to someone through a previous alumni connection. And this person happened to be a senior manager on the team. Although she wasn't in UX, she happened to know the UX team lead at that company. So she was able to tell me that, oh, hold on, I think someone my company is hiring for her team. So let me pass along your resume to her. So the rest was history. It was really fast from that point. The other kind of team lead was able to refer me to this position they hadn't even advertised yet. I don't know if that was something that you probably had heard so many times before, where a lot of the jobs are kind of, right just underneath this, the sea level or surface or something like that, where you don't really see it yet. So yeah, without that kind of connection, I don't think I would have known about that position. So so that was really interesting how that worked out. And once you kind of get your foot in the door, and you sometimes would get a lot of direct contacts from recruiters as well. So I would say that's kind of my overall journey. From kind of transitioning from kind of a direct, I guess, research interest into kind of the UX world. And I've noticed in recent years, there's been kind of an uptick of interest in UX in general. So yeah, I look forward to kind of diving a little bit deeper into some of the specific areas if anyone has any questions. But maybe I'll pass on to Stan to learn about his experience.
Absolutely. Thank you, Becca. And thanks, Susan, for inviting me to be on the panel. And thanks, Sylvia, for also being on the panel. It's wonderful to be here today. My name's Stan Maxson. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of Maryland. I'll be defending in the fall. But I'm also an associate consultant at Esri, which is a leading GIS software company. And for those of you who maybe don't work with GIS, it stands for Geographic Information System, and it's essentially digital mapping, or as we say in the field, geospatial intelligence. As a consultant with Esri, I've been able to work over the past year in various sectors with industry, nonprofits, state and local governments, and public health. Maybe some of you are familiar with the COVID-19 dashboards, which are the websites that let you track case rates by geographic area. Right, that's some of the things that my company does. But like many of you, right, I entered a PhD program intent on achieving that tenure track job, and I was really in it, right? Academia was tightly wedded to my identity. Both of my parents were teachers. My brother was a PhD candidate, and in fact, he defended his dissertation and got a professorship when I advanced to candidacy. So it was tightly wedded to my identity, and I really felt like teaching and research was part of my calling, not just my job. So over time, though, I noticed that things didn't feel right. The daily habits, the life, the interactions. I felt like the future that I was making in academia no longer matched the future that I expected or really wanted. Right. Part of that, my wife and I had a son. We wanted to move closer to home where family would be, and with the job market being what it is in my field of history, you can't choose where you're going to live, right? You have to apply for the jobs where the jobs exist, and that was a big part of one of the shifts that I had in making this transition, this pivot to the field I'm in now. So I knew that the job market was tough, but I also felt confident, like many of you should, that you could make it happen, right? But an aha moment came when I realized that this future that I was making was no longer the future that I wanted, but that there were other options. And not only that, I was poised to take advantage of them. So I felt like I could, and even still can, pursue a career in academia, but the major shift was that I didn't have to anymore, right? So I wouldn't need to feel trapped in a tenure track search. And a lot of that, I have to give a shout out to Dr. Susan Martin here. Susan, the convener of this series, really helped make that shift possible and break it down into pieces, right? This pivot, and I like to think of it as a pivot, is overwhelming for many of us, or it can be, both in the work that it takes to look and identify new jobs, but also the emotional work that it takes to depart on this journey. And I think as PhD students, many of us might find that the work isn't the part that's most challenging. We're used to difficult, long projects that are done in isolation. We can do that. I found that the emotions around it were very challenging, right? So breaking it down into pieces of career exploration and effective job searching is really helped me pursue this track effectively. So career exploration, I thought of as discovering what was possible as a PhD candidate with my nose, to the book, working on my dissertation. I realized I wasn't aware of the wider world around me, the possibilities that I could make use of in terms of what jobs were out there. So that's the outward, right? There's a lot of discovery of what careers exist and careers I might be interested in, but also the inward work of thinking about, what values do I have for my time and my work? What skills and experiences have I accumulated through my PhD training that might make themselves useful in future employment? And there's some action items that I took during that process. I actually revived an old LinkedIn profile and really remade it from the ground up. That's a great place to start. That led, as Becca was suggesting, to informational interviews, making connections with people in jobs and sectors that looked interesting, and taking 5 minutes to ask them a couple of questions about their experience and their roles and responsibilities in the jobs. And also making use of the other the workshops that Susan puts on at the Career Center, and finding a community of peers on campus that are doing the same thing. The job search is the next step, right? Identifying specific employers and jobs that you're interested in, and that's when you take it to the next level of designing your resume, maybe applying for jobs and going to interviews. But at the beginning, right, as I said, I wasn't aware of what the possibilities were. And so it began with these informational interviews that really opened up the horizon of the possible for me. One of the most important informational interviews I had was with the husband of an old college friend who I hadn't spoken to in probably 10 years. And I'd never actually met her husband before. But I was friends with her. I was, a connection with her on LinkedIn. And I spoke with her and she said, hey, you should speak with my husband. He was a PhD student in astronomy, actually. And now he works for, a healthcare company, and he might have, he'd love to talk to you. So I said, okay. And it was speaking with him, and I was talking with, he wanted to know about my experience, what kind of research I was doing as a historian. And I mentioned that part of my research was using GIS software, right, to map old census records, to connect it with documents from a Civil War pension system, and use the software to sort of recreate a community that doesn't exist on the map anymore. And as I was doing that, all of that training was, something I picked up on my own, right? We don't have classes for this in the history department, and I hadn't taken a step to take actual coursework in geography. So I felt like a novice, and he really encouraged me to say, hey, you've developed some real skills here that you should think about leaning into. And that really gave me the confidence to start looking at a new, jobs in the technology sector that I had never thought that I could be competitive for. But when I opened my eyes to that, I found that there were positions where my skills and expertise were greatly valued. So today I work as a consultant, right? And I'm not one of the technical consultants, but I'm one of the liaisons, right? I'm a project manager, right? So I work as a liaison between the developers and the software engineers, and I communicate their needs to the customer and the customer needs to the specialists, right? And those of you who are GAs, right, you guys do this sort of thing every day, right? Where you are taking information that maybe it's your specialty, maybe it's someone else's field that you happen to be teaching that day, and you take this incredibly detailed technical information and you communicate it in a way that's meaningful to the students in front of you, right? So that's something that I do every day on the job. I also, part of my role is keeping projects on time, as I'm going to keep these comments on time, right? So all of our organizational information that anyone that's reading a dissertation can keep their eyes on the details, but also the big picture as well. And I want to close just by affirming everyone here in this room and thanking everyone for joining, but also saying that this is time well spent, that your attendance here today, thinking about your career outside of academia, is also the work of graduate school, right? This is not separate from your thesis or your teaching. This is also an investment in you and your future. So I hope you can celebrate that as well. And I'll pass things on to Sylvia.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm Sylvia. I'm also very happy to be here today. So it's really inspirational. Becca and Stan's stories are really, really great. And I can see that my story had some paralleling, themes with Becca's and Stan's. So just to start with, I'm Sylvia. I had a PhD from University of Maryland, and I graduated in 2019. So that's when I started looking for jobs. And then currently I'm a research director, or in our lingo, we actually call it content director at Hanover Research. So Hanover Research is a mid-sized research company. And then there are several divisions in our company for corporate, and then also for K through 12 institutions, and also higher ed. So I'm a research director in the higher ed division. So there are a lot of moving pieces in my role, but then just to be brief, usually, internally, I talk to different research teams, or actually manage different research teams of different methodological expertise. So that includes, secondary studies, primary research, including surveys, in-depth interviews, focus groups, etc. And then data analytics, like quantitative analysis projects. Externally, I talk to different clients. So my clients are really just higher education leaders. So those are like deans, provost, presidents of institutions of different sizes and type. And I primarily work with not only US clients, but also international clients from the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. So yeah, great fun, managing different time zones. So that's my primary role. So every day I talk to the different research teams, and then talk to clients, and also really manage different projects all at the same time. So I would say that a lot of the transferable skills that are important that I got from my PhD. My PhD was in communication, by the way. So the first piece is communication. So it is really important in my role to communicate very well with the research teams, to really let them understand what the client really needs, and also talking to the client. So we actually play part of the consulting role. Before we start every project, we need to have a conversation with the client to really understand their needs, their priorities, and then to really craft a research that has specific research questions and methodology. And also, at least once every year, we talk to the client to map out the entire year, or maybe 6 months research plan. So that is really important skills, just to not only talk to your peers, but also talk to, different people. If you're working any internships, anything, those are important skills to be articulate, to understand, what people need, and then to come up with solutions to address that need. So the other one is project management. So as PhD students or graduate students, you're managing a lot of different things. You're managing different, projects, and also maybe teaching versus different research. So those skills really come in handy when you come to like a job position, where I think nowadays, not only for my role, but for a lot of roles, project management, how to really make sure everything is working smoothly is very important. So finally, research skills is very important in my role. So I actually specialized in qualitative study during my PhD, but before that, in my master's degrees, I specialized in survey research and some of the, really measurement quantitative skills. So that served me very well. And I would also say that before my PhD program, I actually worked as a market research consultant for close to 2 years. So that was very helpful as well, just landing this job. But as Becca said, my story is also kind of, there's this chance opportunity. So when I started to really seriously looking for jobs, I also, just went to LinkedIn, looked at a lot of different jobs, and reached out to a lot of people, just talk about, because at that moment, I was not very clear if I want to do communication or research, because that's are the two most obvious paths for me. And then at that moment, first of all, I did an internship. It's like a contract work. It's actually for University of Maryland's administration and finance department. So they happen to advertise this contract internship in the summer, which is really just a project management for communication. So I applied, I got into that role. So I worked for that department for about 3 months in the summer. It was fun. It was like building websites, and then, drafting messages, and really making sure the content was great. It was articulate, but also very useful, very impactful. So that was fun. But also part of me was I really miss doing research. I like, thinking very analytically about particular research problem and also coming up with solutions. Even when I was doing communication, I was like, how do I make sure, what research can I do to make sure this message is clear and important? So I realized that I really want to do more of the research. So I started to search, research director, market research, but part of me was also a little bit kind of, I don't really want to do market research consultant again. I want to do something different. So I was searching both communication and research, and I came across this title called content director at Hanover. And I was not sure what content director means at all. I thought it's a combination of communication or something else. But then when I was reading the job description, it's really research and then client consultation, those kind of things. So, and also at that moment, I thought maybe I'm more like, content analyst and not content director. So I reached out to several people at Hanover, and they were great. They were just very willing to talk to me. So I talked to at least 3 people. And the last person, similar stories as Becca's. The last person I talked to, he currently is still, he is the managing director of the higher education division. And I had absolutely no idea. I had a great conversation with him, didn't even know what managing director meant at all at that point. And then we were just talking, I talked to him, I really asked about what the role looks like, what does Hanover do? So it's more like informational based instead of like a job interview. And then he started asking me about my background. So I just talked about my research and my previous experience in market research. And then, this back and forth was very helpful because it informed me of what research analyst does and what research director does, or content analyst or content director. And then eventually he asked me, are you more interested in a purely research role? Because that can lead to also, we have, research consultants, really high level research advisor, but also in terms of if, he asked if you're really interested in client interactions, client management, which really utilizes the communication skills and also the business aspect, the revenue driving aspect of the role, then you should really consider director. So I was like, am I really good enough for director? So, but I just went ahead and applied for the job. And then, after several rounds of interview, I just got the job. I do think it happened also very, very fast once I had an opportunity to speak to this person, the managing director. Yeah, so that's my story. I do think, I would encourage everyone, if you're really interested in industry jobs, whatever internship that you can do, try it. Not necessarily having to put something on your resume, but just to get a taste of what do you want to do? Because I had this moment of confusion. What do I really want to do? I was clear that I didn't want to become a professor. That's a little different from STEM, but I still didn't know what industry job would be the best fit for me. So eventually, I think I'm happy with this role because it uses both my research as well as my communication skills, which can lead to maybe somewhere else in the future. So that's very helpful.
Wow. Every time we do a panel, the stories all fit together beautifully. And I'm just so struck by how all of you are using communication and project management skills. And the idea that you could land one of these jobs so quickly didn't seem like it was in your brain as you started your job search. So with that said, there's been so many possible questions thrown out here. I know that the attendees have questions. So if you have a question, just go ahead and turn your camera on, unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and just let the person know who you want to ask the question to. So is anybody going to start? Brian, go ahead.
I'm fine with starting. Thank you. So again, thank you for your presentations and kind of like giving sort of the story of how you got to be where you are. One of the, I think something that I kind of like to speak on that I find myself intimidated by in thinking of how I can take graduate school work to the private sector, that I think you all did a good job of explaining how it's possible. But how do you sort of frame, like I've always kind of been struck by this idea of like, how did you go about sort of rethinking or reframing how you described your own skills to a private world? Because oftentimes I find that to be like the most challenging, that on like on an intellectual level, like, of course I can say I can do project management, I can direct people because I've had TAs or students or led projects. But in some sense, like how did you best know to fit those kinds of experiences to the language that is recognizable and cognizable by people in the private world? Or like, how did that work? And I think that kind of applies to all three of you. So whoever feels most comfortable starting off, I would take a answer.
Maybe I can take a stab at that first, Brian. I think that's a great question. I heard about that question quite a bit from people. I mean, maybe two things come to my mind. I think the first thing is how to present that on your resume. I've been actually telling a lot of people to actually remove the title of graduate assistant, because a lot of the PhD researchers, when they, try to construct a resume, that seems like, well, that's your title, right, in school. So that doesn't really let you kind of stand out from recruiter search or hiring manager review. When they see graduate assistant, they have no idea what that means. It sounds like you're almost like an undergraduate student or something, which you're not. And also just kind of, I wouldn't say about like all the keywords match. I'm sure you know about that. That's also very important. But if you have a very clear goal of kind of the field you're getting into, like for me, when I was looking into UX research, I kind of framed my title as audience researcher, user researcher, which is still very much accurate. That summarized kind of the research I was doing at the time, but that definitely kind of helped me stand out, or at least to grab people's attention a little bit. And the second point about that is kind of how to actually describe your project experience. I would say that in the industry, I think this probably applies to a lot of fields in the industry, but for UX especially, people want to see the impact of your work. And that translates a little bit differently for a lot of academic work. I think in academia, we kind of see the impact as your citation numbers, maybe, the impact of the journals that you get some research published in, but that doesn't really make any sense to people in the industry. So they want to see what exactly are the research results. Is that impacting any population out there, any initiatives? Did this research make any difference or influence or change in any shape or form? If you can quantify that result, that will be really helpful too. I feel like that might be something. It's also kind of a mind shift where you have to kind of, be confident that, you have a lot of research skills, you've done a lot of impactful projects. It's just a matter of kind of describing that in a way that, that kind of is related or relevant to the job or kind of the description that you're going for. So that's my take. I don't know if Stan or Sylvia have any other insights on that.
I think just quickly, and it sort of follows up on something Becca brought up, which is informational interview and really understanding the role that you're applying for, or maybe if you're having this discussion during an interview, really understanding the role that you're being interviewed for. And the best way to do that is through an informational interview beforehand. So finding people with similar job roles, having that informal conversation in 10 or 15 minutes where they describe their roles and responsibilities. Even better if it's someone, it doesn't have to be, but you'll find some out there. There's 3 on this panel of people who have gotten jobs and have an academic experience. You can ask them specifically, how did you transfer your experience to the job? But I got some really important feedback when describing my work and the research that helped me describe my work in ways that are meaningful for people in industry. And I think it's many of the same things that Becca described, right? Things you can quantify are useful. People in industry want to see, they want to know what you did, right? Rather than how you want to do it, right? So maybe your dissertation involves this, a certain number of interviews, or maybe instead of graduate assistant, you put on your resume that you have 10 years experience in higher education, and you've taught 600 students over your years, right? Like something, things like that, that can really be quick bullets that are easily understandable to people outside of academia.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with both of them. So I think it also depends on what kind of roles or positions that you're looking for. So depending on the descriptions as well as the information you got from the informational interviews, and then try to think about all the responsibilities you had, all the research that you have done, as well as the experiential learning opportunities that you have had, and then try to relate to that particular skill or particular experience that would be important for this role. And also, I think, quantify results would be the best. But then if you cannot have, really quantify the results, quantify the number of projects or the number of students, or, just to provide as much impact as possible. So for example, if the job really requires project management. So how many research studies have you managed at the same time from the beginning to the end? So those are very specific numbers that you can bring into the resume as well as the job interviews.
That is fantastic advice. I get
Thank
the
you.
question a lot of times, people want to come in and get a resume critique, but that's sort of putting the cart before the horse, having those conversations and starting to listen to the language. You all heard how each of these three panelists describe the work that they do. That's the language. So you're all well steeped in the language of academia. The informational interviews and really dissecting those job descriptions will help you start to see the language that you should use. Super. Brian, thank you for asking such an awesome first question. I know that there are more questions out there.
I'm also happy to ask a follow-up question, if that's all right.
Let's give one moment. Let's see if someone else, sometimes that's 7 seconds of silence, right? In the classroom. I also want to say that an event like this is a place to be seen, right? And to stand out. So when you attend events, having your camera on and asking a question later on, if you were to follow up with any one of the panelists, they would know your face, right? They would have met you. So this is, I've worked with students in the past year who have applied, well, info interviews, networked, applied, interviewed, and started their work all remotely. So this is the world we live in. I know there has to be another question. How Xu, you look like you're gonna go. Yay! Thanks, Brian, for being patient and yielding the floor.
Well, thank you so much for introducing your job searching and your work experiences. I'm more interested in the interview process. I heard that during the third round of interview or second round interview, you will be given a chance to conduct a case study. So for example, the company asks you certain casework and you design a research plan on how to conduct analysis. I just wonder if there are any better ways to practice these questions, usually coming from a very academic research background. I know that can be different, like from the corporate perspective. But I mean, this question can be very similar to the previous one. Just asking your insight, how to better prepare for these case study questions.
Yeah, Haoshu, well, nice to meet you. I guess I'll start with that too. Yeah, so for the interview process, I think I'll just to start by describing kind of the process very generally. I think for the consulting firm I was working at, like I said, the process happened really fast. It's usually you start maybe the first round talking with a recruiter just to get a feel of your general fit. It seems like it's worth moving you on to the next round talking with the hiring manager. And then after that, I remember it was pretty informal. They liked you. They just, started that process pretty quickly. But I would say though, for big tech, I think it's more, I think there's a more standard process. For Amazon, I think I would imagine it's the same way for Google or for Meta, previously Facebook, and Microsoft, for example. I think there's kind of 3 rounds in general. Usually the first round is, of course, after talking with a recruiter, you meet with a hiring manager to just understand your background a little bit. And then the second round, usually it's kind of the more skill focused. We call that a whiteboarding exercise, giving you kind of a hypothetical scenario and try to see how you go about solving a research problem. And then after that round, sometimes it's a writing exercise too, because as a researcher, they want to make sure that you can write very, very well. The third round is definitely more intense. It's very similar, I would say, to kind of the all-day campus visit for like an academic job search. You do almost like an all-day panel round. You meet with 6 or 7 interviewers consecutively. You do portfolio presentation and a lot of behavioral question rounds. So yeah, for those kind of, I would say maybe the skill, research skill focused kind of interviews, I would say most of the time they're not trying to criticize your skill sets or the projects you have done. You can take that as almost like a thesis or a dissertation defense. You are defending kind of your research process. They want to know your thinking process. For example, you may mention that for this project, I sent out a survey to 500 people. I conducted an interview with 20 people. And then they may ask you, why did you decide to do that? And if you had more time, what would you have done differently? And how did you decide on that sample size, for example? They just want to kind of see that decision process to see how you come to the terms with those decisions, first of all, and also if you will be able to be kind of flexible if you had more resources, more time, or maybe if the scope changed in some ways, and they want to see kind of the results, how you feel afterwards, and what kind of impact it created. I feel like in the industry, they care a lot about the recommendations and the impact. I think similar in the consulting world as well. The clients don't really care about kind of the process in some ways. They want to see, okay, you did all that. What does that mean for me, right? They want to see the actual results and the takeaways they can use from your insights. So yeah, I think that's just I know that's very general, but I think it's just to come in with that mindset that you're your stuff, your research, as long as you can kind of provide very sound rationale for your decisions, for how you conducted the process. I think that really kind of carry a long way. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is helpful.
Yeah.
Sylvia or Stan, when you got to the interview process, were you asked to either give a talk or do any of the kinds of things Becca described? And if not, could you just describe what that second round of interviews was like for you? Because I think that's really powerful for other people to hear.
So, I'll start. So my interview process was a little bit intense. I cannot remember all the details, but I remember when I was interviewing for this job, I was also interviewing for other, associate director, and consulting jobs. So I was already preparing to do the consulting case studies. So like the McKinsey, those kind of things, where it was actually a fun experience for me because I'm very analytical. I love to solve the cases. So it really taught me like a framework to look at the problems and then, kind of just to separate it into different categories and look at different categories and come up with solutions, those type of things. I actually enjoyed preparing for that, although it was still nerve-wracking when you were actually faced with somebody asking you suddenly a question and then you have to present with the solutions. And then it so happened that the 2 companies that I interviewed primarily during that time, one is Hanover, the other one is another company, both use that methodology, not like very strictly McKinsey type, but definitely use that framework. So I prepared fully. So I was lucky in that sense. So at Hanover, so the first round was very fast. It was with the HR folks. And then because I think this person already recommended me, I was very nervous when I was preparing, when I was getting the first interview, whereas I was just informed on the phone that you're going to get the, the writing assignment, and then this is what the second round interview looks like. So basically nothing really happened during the first round. And I got the writing assignment, which is actually an editing assignment. So I needed to edit a long research report, which takes several days, which was fine. And then the second round, really the on-site interview, First of all, so before the on-site interview, I was also asked to do an exam. So it's like just a math questions, like reading comprehension, very like logical stuff. I also did some test prep, just looking at, just Googling those kind of things. And I did some test prep, and then I don't think I did a great job. So I was a little surprised that I was invited to the on-site interview. So I really didn't know the purpose of that writing, test. So the on-site was like 3 rounds with different people, and all of like each person asked about the case where I need to provide solutions. They also asked about some basic, background information, who you are, what you have done. And also some of them asked me to provide an example, like, have you encountered a challenge in the research? And then how did you come up with the solution? So I remember, giving most examples for when I was in the market research consultant role. So that was just because that was more similar to the role I was applying for, and then had a lot of like client facing and expectation management kind of perspective. So I think generally I would say prepare for 3 kinds of things. One is your background, what you have done, the research, and then your projects. You need to be very familiar with that. And also depending on the role, like for my role, you also need to prepare for some examples of the things that happened to you. So like how you how you overcome some challenges, how you did a particular study. So those kind of questions. The third one for me was the case. So I did spend quite a bit of time preparing for those cases. And then, yeah, like Susan said, or you can just Google, there are a lot of resources out there, even YouTube, there are a lot of like just case interviews, mock interviews on YouTube. So I watched a lot of that. And it was interesting, to be honest, just coming from academia, it's like teaching you how to think problems strategically, which is very important for the director and then managerial level roles.
My interview process was very similar, although I was not asked to provide a case study or run through these tests, but it was multi-tiered, right? It began with after the application, a call with the recruiter, sort of, again, as Becca said, sort of just a conversation to see if you're a good fit for the organization. And then it was the first interview was with the person who would become my line manager, right? Asking a very information about my background, but also to see if I understood the role that I'd be taking in the company. So a lot of information of background to make sure I was really understood the job announcement the position I was applying for. So there were some questions about this scenario might come up with a customer. How would you handle it? And those questions were pretty informal and were answered on the fly. But between that, there were, it was over a month. It was almost, I think, almost 2 months before I heard back from the recruiter. And it was because I reached out again to the recruiter because as Sylvia was expressing, I had other interviews that I was interviewing, and I actually was going to get a job offer, but I kind of wanted this job more. So I, reached out to the interviewer and just said, let them know that there was another position on the table, and if they were still interested, let them know that this was the, sort of the premier job that I was interested in, and wanted to give them the opportunity to continue before I accepted something else. And I was nerve-wracking. I think I sent a draft to Susan before sending it, but they were very receptive, and they scrambled, right, to put together that full day interview that Becca and Sylvia were talking about. And coming from, I had been really practicing for jobs on the academic job market for that campus visit, and all of the the teaching exposition, the the teaching philosophy and the full day on campus. It was very similar. It was all remote because this was 2021. But you know, it was a full day sitting in front of camera. I talked to, I think, probably 15 people across 8 different sessions, right? So it was a full day of interview. And then after that, it was another call from the recruiter for a follow-up and a job offer.
So super. So the time just goes by so quickly. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to be able to have each of you share a piece of advice, something that you wish you had known before. And there's enough time for each of you to take a minute or so to do that. Is there anyone who's sort of ready to roll with that? I don't want to put you on the spot.
I'll start, Susan. I think I'll just quickly mention that, you know, I think one of the biggest, I guess, difference I would say, you know, working in the industry is that you are working on a team. You are working with a lot of stakeholders. So I would definitely brush up on a lot of those kind of skills because in academia, we're very much isolated. You are just working on your own research. So you don't have to answer to anybody, I guess, maybe besides your supervisor or something like that. But yes, so in the industry, like both Stan and Sylvia mentioned, there are a lot of stakeholders you work with and a lot of coordination, a lot of kind of emotional intelligence required. So yeah, good to kind of step out of that comfort zone sometimes. And also, like Sylvia mentioned, I think that summer internship, if you still have a few years left in your program, definitely dive into that if you are very sure about going into the industry. Because that sometimes can really set you apart when you're applying for that first job afterwards. Sometimes the project experience or maybe just a few months of industry experience really helps you stand out, you know, from just purely having been a graduate assistant, for example. And I think maybe just lastly, very encouraging note, don't sell yourself short. I think in academia, we're so used to that, you know, we're still maybe academic in training. So you need to kind of jump through a lot of hurdles to go through the next step to be a full professor in some ways. But and then when you're interviewing in the industry, you feel somewhat a little bit intimidated. You're not ready for some of the challenges out there. And you feel like, well, maybe I don't have the industry experience. I'm not ready for this. But no, I think definitely change that mindset. You have years of research experience. You're not just a fresh out of college. Those definitely translate into work experience too. So so yeah, I would definitely kind of highlight that. Don't sell yourself short. You can definitely kind of go for a lot of really, really high level positions. So yeah, that's all from me.
I'll just follow up because I was going to echo what Becca was saying, which is as PhD students, we spend all of our time focusing on what we don't know. We're very, very good at knowing what we don't know. But that's not always how the rest of the world works, right? So really, you know, reflect on your experience and be able to communicate it with confidence is really important. And you might find yourself that you are highly competitive for roles and jobs that that you thought that maybe you don't measure up, right? But it's maybe taking time not to focus on what you don't know, but maybe what you have accomplished is important as well. And because I'm in that position now, I'll say, you know, it's okay to begin that search outside of academia. It's probably important before you defend your dissertation, right? It is possible to finish it's very challenging, but it is possible to finish your degree while you have another job. And so I just wanted to make that space available and know that there's other people that are doing it as well. And if you want to talk about managing those, you know, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to speak with you all. So thank you.
So it is interesting that what I wanted to say are already said by Becca and Stan. So the first thing I wanted to say, you know, something that I wish I had known is that I'm valuable. So I think I didn't realize that when I was especially close to the graduation, because I wasn't sure, you know, how I might apply my skills and everything to the industry. Although, even though I had industry experience in the past, I was still a little bit at a loss. And then it could happen very fast. So even since that you could apply for jobs as well as completing your you know, dissertation defense at the same time, I would also say it can also happen very fast if you just want to complete your dissertation first and then do the job search and then land a job. That's my process, because I was not great at multitasking. So I actually finished my dissertation and then did the summer internship and then landed a job very quickly afterwards. So now I'm definitely good at multitasking because the role requires it. But if you think it's best for you to just complete the dissertation and then focus your sole attention to the job search, that can happen as well. And then the last thing I do want to mention is that, yeah, you know, just to get out of your comfort zone a little bit, even though if you can do a summer internship in the school or at school or somewhere else, that would be very valuable just to get you some experience, you know, talking to different folks, different people, and then understanding how the industry actually works, or even just a different aspect, you know, non-academic work in school.
I cannot thank each one of you enough. You all you've been so gracious and giving of your time and your advice, and each of your stories, I hope, is an inspiration for a doc student or a postdoc that's sitting here saying, how am I ever going to do this? These three humans are living proof that there are great opportunities out there. And I love the language, don't sell yourself short. Please use the resources that are available in the slide deck. There are links to Doctoral Career Navigator, which is our Elms Canvas space. There's also a link to Aurora, which the university subscribes to. These are both career planning tools for doctoral students, and I'm available to meet with you as well. So please, if you are willing to unmic and say thank you, let our panelists know how much you appreciated them today. And there are many other alumni and professionals out there that will talk to you. So let's give them a round of applause and say thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Be well. I'm going to stop the recording.